Good morning, Marijuana Nation. It's Tuesday, May 16th, 2017, and you're tuned in to episode 247 of Marijuana Today Daily. I'm your host, Shay Gunther, and I'll be walking you through today's marijuana news and headlines. As always, we have a full and busy day of cannabis news in our hands, so let's jump right into it. Our top story of the day is a great piece of investigative journalism by the Associated Press, who obtained documents out of Minnesota showing that the state's two licensed medical marijuana companies have collectively lost $11 million over just the last 2 years of operations. One of the licensed providers, Minnesota Medical Solutions, lost $1.2 million in 2006 after losing $3 million the year before. The other company, Leafline Labs, lost $4.7 million last year on top of a loss of $2.2 million in 2015. The huge losses came as a result of operating in one of the tightest medical marijuana markets in the country. If one politician quoted by the AP is any indication for the mood of the state legislature, the two licensed companies might be in for a long winter of losses, with State Representative Nick Zerwas saying, quote, "I don't think there's going to be any appetite for broadening of conditions or delivery forms. It's not the job of the state government to create conditions for which private companies can be profitable for selling marijuana," unquote. Yesterday in Maryland, one of the state's licensed medical marijuana providers filed an emergency motion to block the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission from issuing the final round of cultivation licenses because the commission did not follow the law when picking license winners. Alternative Medicine Maryland is arguing that a deposition conducted last week proves for the first time that the Medical Cannabis Commission did not factor race into account when picking industry license winners. This is an issue that longtime listeners have heard me report back on often. The emergency motion comes just days ahead of a scheduled meeting tomorrow to start the process of finalizing cultivation licenses, a necessary step before the rest of the industry can get spooled up. This is a good story to click over for the full read, as most stories out of Maryland are these days. Swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com or our Twitter account at mjtodaydaily for links to this story and all the other news we cover. Our final top story of the day is a good piece by Gage Peak over at Leafly that rounds up the various statements of opposition that have come out of Washington, D.C. in recent days in the wake of U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions' re-declaration of the federal war on drugs. One of the best angles on this story is the bipartisan nature of the blowback, with politicians on both sides of the aisle raising the alarm over the prospects of a ramped-up drug war. Republican Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky released a statement saying, quote, "Mandatory minimum sentences have unfairly and disproportionately incarcerated too many minorities for too long. Attorney General Sessions' new policy will accentuate that injustice. Instead, we should treat our nation's drug epidemic as a health crisis and less as a lock 'em up and throw away the key problem," unquote. One of his colleagues on the other side of the political spectrum, Democratic Senator Bob Casey, tweeted, quote, "This is wrong. DOJ should focus on prosecuting violent criminals, not nonviolent drug offenders. We must reform our criminal justice system," unquote. Swing over to Leafly to catch the other statements opposing Sessions' latest moves. Those are our top stories for today. It's time for Marijuana Today Daily Headlines Blitz. Before we blitz out on headlines, let's quickly talk about the sales and business development position we're hiring for here at MJ Today Media. If you or someone you know knows how to sell media sponsorship and would like to help us grow and expand our business, then this is a great episode for you to have tuned into. We're looking for a motivated self-starter with a proven track record of selling stuff, preferably media sponsorship or something similar. This is not yet quite a full-time position, but a successful candidate would quickly make it so. With our traffic growing gangbusters, our pool of sellable inventory is growing alongside. Help us turn that inventory into sponsorship dollars and help our podcasts survive and thrive. If you or someone you know is a good fit for what we're looking for, swing over to mjtodaydaily.com/jobs and get your application in. That's mjtodaydaily.com/jobs. All right, time for the blitz. Last week, I reported on a story out of Florida where a licensed medical marijuana provider just started selling marijuana in whole flower form, whereas before they sold their cannabis in a ground-up blend meant for easy vaporizing. With smoking marijuana banned as an ingestion method in Florida, the news of licensed provider Truliev's new whole flower packaging made headlines as news stories breathlessly reported that it could be smoked in bongs, bowls, and joints. Well, yesterday, the Florida Department of Health stepped in and dropped an order on Trulieve to stop selling cannabis in whole flower form. With as disjointed and muddled as Florida's medical marijuana scene is right now, this is a story that I'm sure I'll be touching back on in the near future. Tom Angel over MassRoots has a good story up about the proposed adult use legalization legislation announced yesterday in New Jersey by State Senator Nicholas Scutari. As I reported on yesterday morning before the state senator announced all the details of his plan, the measure was introduced with an eye on next year's legislative session, as current disgraced Governor Chris Christie has made it pretty clear that he'd veto any kind of progressive movement on marijuana policy. Click over to MassRoots to Tom's story for all the details on this one. The states of Minnesota and Iowa are in discussions over a plan that would have medical marijuana produced in Minnesota made available to patients in Iowa. On Friday, Iowa Governor Terry Branstad signed into law a bill that frees up in-state patients to get their medicine from medical marijuana providers in Minnesota, while also directing Iowa regulators to engage with Minnesota's 2 licensed providers, who we talked about at the top of today's show. This could help bolster the bottom lines of those 2 companies while also getting medical marijuana into the hands of Iowans in need ahead of their states being able to provide it themselves. But the arrangement could raise the hackles of Federal Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who could crack down on the scheme due to its border-crossing nature. This is another story we'll be tracking. Alaska Dispatch News has a good story up about the inability of legal marijuana companies in their state to gain the right to stamp their products with the official Alaska-grown label, a designation available for in-state produce to show off locality. Despite the fact that all legal marijuana in Alaska is, by law, grown in the state, you would think that it should be easy for legal producers to successfully apply to use it on their products, but just like in banking, the devil is in the federal details. In this case, it's federal funding that the State Division of Agriculture is wary of losing should it get involved in any way in legal marijuana. As the days tick by after the end of Florida's yearly legislative session, one that came without any kind of progress being made in advancing their medical marijuana program as mandated by voters in the fall, all eyes in the state are turning to the 2 men who could call back lawmakers to finish their work. Governor Rick Scott and State Senate President Joe Negrin, who could call a special session in conjunction with State House Speaker Richard Corcoran, who's already come out in favor of the idea. The Tampa Bay Times piece has a great collection of Florida lawmakers who have chimed in on the call for a special session. Click over to that one for the full read. Marijuana Business Daily's chart of the week shows the slow and steady rise in the number of registered patients in Washington, D.C.'s medical marijuana program, with around 1,400 new patients being registered over the last year to bring the total to just under 5,000. The city's medical marijuana program has been one of the more restrictive around, with recently announced changes meant to expand the patient pool not yet having been implemented. And finally for today, we have a good story about the intersection of marijuana and the media, with a journalist in South Dakota being compelled to testify against a marijuana industry consultant in a case I reported on last year involving the Flandreau Santee Sioux tribe and their plans to grow and sell marijuana on reservation lands. Argus leader reporter Dana Ferguson was one of several members of a tour conducted by the tribe of their cultivation operation and is being asked to testify on the matter by South Dakota Attorney General Marty Jackley. As Minnesota Public Radio so nicely puts it, quote, "That's generally a big no for journalists," unquote. Argus leader media news director Corey Myers responded for his paper by saying, quote, "Commanding our reporter to testify in this case is not only troubling, but unnecessary. There are multiple avenues for the Attorney General to get testimony about the tour, including from any of the 5 elected officials present, without compromising our reporter's role as an independent observer," unquote. 40 states in the nation have laws protecting members of the media from being compelled to testify in cases like this, but sadly for reporter Dana Ferguson, South Dakota is not one of them. Those are the headlines and news for the day. I'll be back with you again tomorrow morning with another information-packed episode of Marijuana Today Daily. But in the meantime, if you have any stories to share or feedback to give, zip us an email to headlines@mjtodaydaily.com. And while you're clicking around the interwebs, swing over to our Twitter account at MJTodayDaily and visit our website at mjtodaydaily.com to find links to all the news we cover. What's red and smells like blue paint? Red paint. Thanks to our awesome patron listeners for the support that makes this show possible, with a special shout out to our newest patron listener, Naomi. To join the illustrious ranks of Naomi and the other Patreon listeners yourself, swing over to our website at mjtodaydaily.com and click on that big blue button at the top of the page that says Become a Patron. I'm your host, Shay Gunther. Thanks for tuning in and starting your day with marijuana today.
One take, Shay. One take.